Shalom friends, welcome to Daf Reactions, Bava Metzia 114. Yes, this daf was in fact from Friday, but what do you want me to do, film on SHABBOS? I wanted to talk about this daf for a very specific reason. Every so often, a poorly designed PDF with an atrocious font will circulate around the hellscape formerly known as Twitter. And it's just a list of terrible statements that the Talmud says. The Talmud says this, the Talmud says that. Look at these Jews and their evil Talmud telling them to do these evil things. They deserve everything bad that's ever happened to them and ever will. I read these statements before I ever began to read my first page of Talmud. So now when the daf cycle actually lands on such a page where something apparently has been said, it behooves me as a learner to pay close attention to it, to see what is said and by whomst. This is just such an instance. And unfortunately, it comes in the midst of a really delightful story I would have loved to tell you. I really would have, and maybe I still will. But I needed to talk about this first. One day, Rabba bar Avu discovers Elijah the prophet standing in the midst of a graveyard of Gentiles, which is quite a first sentence for a Gothic novel. It doesn't say why Elijah happens to be hanging out in this cemetery instead of doing his usual other activities. Perhaps Elijah was feeling a bit of an emo goth moment. Perhaps it was like Mount Auburn Cemetery, which, yeah, is a cemetery, but also just a beautiful place to contemplate nature and the world. Maybe he was doing Hitbodedut. Maybe he just wanted to get away from another boring conversation with Metatron. Who knows? But whatever Elijah's reason for seeking this solitude, it didn't really matter to Rabba bar Avu. Not when he had questions that needed answering. Now, personally, I would have chosen to ask Elijah things like, what is the meaning of life? Why do bad things happen to good people? Things like that. But Rabba bar Avu is more interested in asking Elijah about legalities involving debt repayment. And, to each their own. Elijah answers a bunch of his questions, probably hoping, if I answer this, will he leave? But then Rabba bar Avu pops back in, and he's like, wait a second. How are you standing in a cemetery? Aren't you a priest? Consider the ritual impurity. You're not allowed in here. There's dead people. Maybe Elijah is getting a little bit snippy because he's peeved at being continuously interrupted on his day off. He's like, oh, so you haven't studied the Mishnaic order of Taharot? Because if you did, you would already know that you don't get ritual impurity from the graves of non-Jewish people, only Jewish people. Being in the same space with the deceased person is in fact one of the ways people become ritually impure within Judaism. But the reference here is to a Baraita from Shimon Bar Yochai, who says because the Jewish people are referred to as man in Ezekiel 34:31, then according to him, this means that only Jewish people are referred to by the label man and not non-Jewish people, which is, of course, ridiculous. These vibes are no good. Throw them out. Get new vibes in here. All human beings are created b'tselem Elokim in the image of God. Every single one, Jewish or non-Jewish. Given that it was Shimon Bar Yochai, however, am I surprised that he said this? No, not at all. Shimon Bar Yochai is notorious for being a fugitive zealot on the run from the occupying Roman Empire. He was an isolationist homeschooling parent who lived off the grid with his son for 13 years. Buried up to the necks in sand and just living off carobs. That's who we're working with here. And him and his son used their laser vision to incinerate Jewish people who weren't being Jewish in the right way, according to them. Or Jews with whom Shimon Bar Yochai had personal beef. He was quite equal opportunity in his disgusting zealotry. I would have loved to talk about the remainder of the story, which is actually about Elijah taking Rabba bar Avu to heaven to rake up a pile of magical leaves. And to make some observations about how people who believe that Judaism has no conception of the afterlife are in fact gravely mistaken. An afterlife that does not, by the way, exist exclusively for Jews. Instead, I'll reiterate that the Talmud is really a collection of thousands and thousands of conversations between hundreds of people and schools of thought that took place over hundreds of years in a variety of locations. They do not agree. And each of these people had different lives and different experiences. And that shapes how they act and what they say, and how it's perceived by us now, both good and bad. The Talmud just records it. Sometimes you'll get a Baraita on the contrary, like Gittin 61, about the importance of burying non-Jews with the same respect and dignity as you would bury somebody in our own community. But sometimes you get a comment from Shimon Bar Yochai. As a modern learner, what do? I have to look at this issue square in the face and hope my reflexes are fast enough to dodge its laser vision.